The church stood silent that morning, wrapped in a strange calm that felt almost unnatural. The sun had barely risen when the first police car pulled up to St. Gloria's Community Chapel, its flashing lights slicing through the mist that hung low over the empty parking lot. Inside, behind the stained glass doors, something had gone terribly wrong. The janitor, who unlocked the bishop's office, had dropped his keys before he could even scream. There, slumped behind the desk where countless prayers had been written, was Bishop Daniel Cross, lifeless, his white collar stained with red. The room smelled of iron and candle wax, the kind of mix that clings to memory forever. On the wall above him, scrawled in deep crimson letters, were 4 chilling words: "Sins don't die easy." Within minutes, police tape sealed the hallway. Cameras flashed. Reporters began to gather outside, whispering the same question that would soon haunt an entire congregation. Who would kill a man of God, and why? For those who knew Bishop Cross, the thought seemed impossible. He was a pillar of faith, a man who built his reputation on saving others. But those who truly knew him, the ones who'd seen him behind the pulpit and behind closed doors, had begun to notice something shifting inside him long before this night. His sermons had grown restless. His eyes carried exhaustion he couldn't explain. And then there was her. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. To the congregation, she was simply the bishop's loyal secretary, polite, quiet, the kind of woman who smiled without revealing much. But in private, whispers about her filled the church's corridors. Whispers of late-night meetings, locked doors, and a closeness that made even the most faithful uneasy. The first time Sarah arrived at St. Gloria's, she looked broken, like a woman running from something. The bishop had taken her in, offering counseling, guidance, and what he called spiritual healing. No one questioned it at first. Bishop Cross was known for helping lost souls. But as weeks turned into months, his guidance turned into something else, something forbidden. Late nights at the church became their secret routine. The bishop's car always stayed longer than it should. The lights in his office flickered past midnight. And when he finally went home, he carried a scent that wasn't his wife's perfume. He told himself it was compassion, that he was comforting someone in need. But guilt doesn't sleep forever. It festers. On Sundays, as he stood before the congregation preaching about purity, his voice trembled with something deeper than faith. It was shame disguised as passion. And as much as he tried to hide it, Sarah could see it too. She saw how his hands shook when they brushed against hers, how his words softened when he spoke to her. It was no longer prayer, it was desire. But desire, once it takes root, grows wild. Soon their meetings weren't about church matters at all. They met in hotel rooms under false names. They shared promises of escape. Sarah believed every word he whispered. She believed he loved her, that he would leave his wife, that their secret was blessed in its own strange way. But to Daniel Cross, it was a sin that needed burying before it destroyed everything he had built. Still, secrets have a way of slipping through cracks, and cracks were already forming in his perfect life. His wife, Martha, noticed first. A perfume on his shirt that wasn't hers. Missed calls from an unknown number. Long silences at dinner. Then came the Sunday when Sarah didn't show up for service, and the bishop seemed distracted, searching the crowd for a face that wasn't there. Martha followed his gaze. That was the day the walls of his holy empire began to crumble. Over the next few weeks, The church buzzed with rumors. People whispered during prayer meetings. Some claimed to have seen them holding hands in his car. Others swore they heard shouting in the office late one evening. But the bishop denied everything. He told himself it was just gossip, that God would protect him. Yet the more he prayed, the louder his fear grew. Then the unthinkable happened. The night before his death, the bishop met Sarah one last time inside the church. Witnesses saw her car in the parking lot after midnight. The lights were on in his office. And then they went out. No one knows exactly what was said in that room, but neighbors later reported hearing a woman's voice shouting, followed by a loud crash. When the lights came back on, it was nearly 3 a.m., and only one car drove away. The next morning, the bishop was found dead. Sarah was gone. The police ruled it a homicide. But as detectives began their search, they discovered something far darker than an affair gone wrong. The bishop's phone contained messages that hinted at threats, confessions, and someone else who knew about the secret, someone who wanted both of them silenced. And hidden beneath his desk, in a locked drawer the officers almost missed, they found a small folded note. No signature, no explanation. Just 7 haunting words written in a woman's handwriting. You promised me heaven. You gave me hell. The story of Bishop Daniel Cross would soon grip the nation. A tale of power, passion, betrayal, and faith twisted beyond recognition. But this was only the beginning, because by the time the investigation was over, 2 people would be dead. And the truth would reveal that the man of God was not the only one living a lie. And as the detectives looked upon his lifeless body that morning, they couldn't have imagined that the real storm hadn't even begun. Before the night of blood, before the screams that echoed through St. Gloria's empty halls, there was a story that began in silence, a story of 2 souls who mistook temptation for comfort and forgiveness for permission. Sarah Mitchell hadn't always been the woman who would risk everything for a man like Daniel Cross. Just a year before she joined the church, she had been a different person, a wife, a mother, a believer in second chances. But her marriage fell apart when her husband's gambling swallowed everything they owned. He left one morning and never came back. The shame crushed her spirit, and in her search for redemption, she walked through the doors of St. Gloria's Community Chapel, broken but hopeful. Daniel Cross saw that pain, and in her pain, he saw purpose. He had built his ministry on saving the lost. He took Sarah under his wing, offering her a job, guidance, and something she hadn't felt in a long time: attention. For months, their relationship seemed innocent. She worked hard, he praised her loyalty. The church grew, donations soared, and Martha Cross, his wife, stood proudly beside him as the model family of faith. But every saint hides a shadow, and Daniel's shadow was growing darker by the day. The first time he touched Sarah's hand, it was during a prayer. Her tears fell freely that evening. His stayed hidden behind his collar. The second time, there were no tears, only the quiet understanding of 2 people who knew they'd already crossed the line. And once the line was crossed, there was no turning back. Their affair deepened under the cover of worship. Locked office doors, private counseling sessions, weekends at religious retreats that no one dared question. Daniel told himself he loved her. He told her she was special, that what they shared was different, a love sanctified in secrecy. Sarah believed him.
She believed that his words, his touches, his promises meant something holy in a world that had already broken her once. But the truth was far from holy. The more they hid, the more paranoid Daniel became. His sermons began to sound like confessions in disguise. He preached about sin, forgiveness, and the battle between flesh and spirit, all while staring directly into the front row, where Sarah sat quietly, her eyes filled with guilt and devotion. Martha noticed the changes. She saw the way her husband avoided her gaze, the way he tensed when Sarah entered the room. At night, he would sit awake, scrolling through his phone, staring at messages he should have deleted. She pretended not to see, because facing the truth would mean admitting the life she'd built was a lie. But secrets have a way of asking to be found. One afternoon, Martha walked into his office to drop off his lunch. His phone buzzed on the desk. One message flashed across the screen, a message that changed everything. It read, "I can't keep hiding anymore. If you won't tell her, I will." From that day, the perfect image of the Cross family began to rot from within. Daniel panicked. He confronted Sarah after service, begging her to stay quiet. But Sarah was done with lies. She told him she was tired of sneaking around, tired of being his hidden sin. She wanted him to choose, her or the church. And when he hesitated, she told him something that made his blood run cold. She was pregnant. The air left his lungs. His world, the sermons, the respect, the donations, the power, it all flashed before his eyes. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a ticking bomb. He begged her to be reasonable, offered money, promised to take care of everything. But Sarah wasn't that naive girl anymore. She wanted truth. She wanted a future. She wanted the man who had preached love to the world to finally live by it. When he refused, her love curdled into fury. That night she called him again. The call lasted 6 minutes. Neighbors later recalled hearing shouting from inside his office. The next day, the bishop arrived at church looking like a ghost. His hands trembled as he prepared his sermon. The words stumbled out of him like confessions. The congregation thought it was passion. It was fear. Behind closed doors, Sarah began sending him messages, threats wrapped in heartbreak. "You can't erase me. Everyone will know. I will make her see who you really are."
Daniel stopped sleeping. He began drinking at night. His wife noticed the smell, the trembling hands, the cold sweat. When she asked, he said it was stress from the ministry. But Martha wasn't blind. She hired someone, a private investigator from out of town, to find the truth. Within 2 weeks, the investigator handed her a file. Inside were photographs, hotel records, and one image that burned itself into her memory. Her husband's car parked outside a motel with Sarah standing at the door in his jacket. The perfect marriage had turned to ash. But instead of confronting him right away, Martha waited. She smiled through Sunday service. She kissed him before he left the house. She sat beside him during communion, all while the knowledge of betrayal spread through her veins like poison. When she finally confronted him, it wasn't with screams, it was with silence. She simply placed the photos on the table and walked away. He chased after her, begging for forgiveness. She didn't say a word. That silence hurt more than rage ever could. The next morning, Sarah showed up at the church again. She wanted to talk. Daniel promised her it was the last time. The conversation was supposed to be about closure, but closure wasn't what Sarah wanted anymore. She wanted revenge. She threatened to tell his wife, to go to the church board, even to the media if he didn't leave with her.
She said she didn't care about his position anymore. She just wanted him to choose her publicly. Daniel panicked. He begged her not to, but she was determined. She left the office saying, "Tomorrow they'll all know who you really are." Those were the last words anyone heard her say alive. That night, the bishop sat alone in his office long after the candles had gone out. He stared at the empty seat across from him, where Sarah had sat countless times. He thought about his wife upstairs, pretending to sleep. He thought about the pulpit that would soon become his stage of shame. He pulled out his phone and stared at Sarah's number. His thumb hovered over it for a long time. Then he made a call, not to her, but to someone else. A call that would set the next day's tragedy in motion. Hours later, a security camera captured Sarah's car entering the church parking lot. She never came out. The next morning, the bishop was found dead. Sarah was missing. What happened inside that church between midnight and dawn would become one of the most shocking scandals in the history of St. Gloria's. But what investigators didn't know then was that this was not a crime of passion alone. It was a crime born from three hearts, one broken, one betrayed, and one consumed by jealousy. And before the truth would be uncovered, two of them would be buried. Under the gray dawn that followed, St. Gloria's no longer felt holy. The parking lot was crowded with police cruisers, and reporters were already circling like birds over carrion. Inside, detectives moved through the chapel with gloved hands and hushed voices. The bishop's office looked like a storm had torn through it. Papers scattered, a chair overturned, the Bible split open on the floor, as if it too had tried to flee what happened here. Detective Harper, a man whose faith had died long before his wife, stood at the doorway and took in the scene. Blood on the carpet, no weapon, no sign of forced entry. Whoever killed Bishop Cross had been someone he trusted enough to let inside. The first question was obvious. Where was Sarah Mitchell? Her car still sat outside the church, driver's seat pushed back, her purse on the passenger side. The engine had cooled hours ago. In the glove compartment, officers found a small envelope addressed to Daniel. Inside, a sonogram photo and a note written in soft, slanted handwriting. "You said we'd face it together." By noon, news of the bishop's death reached every pew in the city. Congregants wept on the steps, clutching rosaries, muttering prayers for the man they believed was closest to God. But behind every whispered prayer was the same question: where is the girl? When detectives visited her apartment, they found dinner still on the table, candles burned down to wax puddles, and a half-packed suitcase on the bed. In the trash, a torn piece of a church letterhead with the bishop's handwriting. "Meet me tonight. We'll settle everything." To the investigators, it looked like a lover's meeting gone wrong. To Martha Cross, it looked like vindication. She hadn't spoken since that morning. She sat on the couch, hands clasped around a coffee cup she never drank from. When the officers questioned her, she answered softly, almost rehearsed. "He worked late. I went to bed. I woke up to sirens." Not a tremor in her voice, not even when they asked about Sarah Mitchell. She simply said, "I know who she is." But behind those calm eyes, something colder was stirring. As detectives combed through the bishop's phone records, they found a series of deleted messages recovered from the cloud. Calls made not only to Sarah, but also to an unlisted number registered to Samuel Price, the church's senior deacon and Daniel's oldest friend. When asked, Samuel said the bishop had been distraught, terrified of losing everything. He claimed Daniel called him around midnight, saying Sarah had threatened him to ruin him, that he didn't know what to do. Samuel told him to pray, to think clearly, and then hung up. He swore he hadn't heard from him again. Yet the next day, surveillance footage placed Samuel's car outside the church minutes before Sarah's arrival.
The story began to shift from sin to conspiracy. Forensic teams discovered faint traces of another person's blood mixed with Daniel's on the office door handle. Female DNA, but not Sarah's. When the results came back 2 days later, it matched Martha Cross. The officers returned to the Cross residence. Martha didn't resist. She said she had gone to the church that night to confront her husband, that she found him alive, arguing with Sarah. She claimed she left before anything happened. Her eyes glistened when she said it, the perfect picture of sorrow. But sorrow can hide satisfaction. The detectives pressed further. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? Why did she lie about being in bed? She lowered her gaze and whispered, "Because I didn't want the world to see how broken our marriage truly was." Her words bought her sympathy, but sympathy doesn't close a case. 3 days later, hikers found a body in the woods 5 miles from the chapel. It was Sarah Mitchell. Her throat was bruised, her nails torn, traces of soil under them that matched the church's garden beds. She'd been strangled hours after the bishop's death. The investigation imploded. Now there were 2 murders, 2 timelines, and a chain of deceit that wrapped tighter with every discovery. Detectives traced the path back through phone pings and gas station cameras. At 1:43 a.m., Martha's SUV was caught near the edge of town, heading toward the forest. She claimed she was driving aimlessly, lost in grief. But grief doesn't explain the shovel marks found in her trunk or the scratches on her wrists. When the police confronted her again, she changed her story. "I followed them," she confessed. "I wanted to catch them together. I saw them fighting. She attacked him. I panicked and ran." But the timeline didn't fit. Sarah died later. Every truth Martha offered unraveled into another lie. And in each unraveling, Samuel Price seemed to appear again, always nearby, always offering help, always protecting her. He hired her a lawyer, comforted her during questioning, attended every service held in Daniel's name. To outsiders, it looked like faith in action. To the detectives, it smelled like guilt. One evening, while reviewing phone logs, Harper noticed a series of texts between Samuel and Martha in the days leading up to the murders. One message, sent the night before Daniel's death, read, "He doesn't deserve forgiveness. Let God judge the rest."
When confronted, Samuel said the message was spiritual advice, but Harper had seen enough liars to know that holy words often hide unholy intentions. Meanwhile, in the city morgue, the coroner made a discovery that changed everything. The bishop's wounds weren't random. Each stab had been delivered in a deliberate pattern, a cross carved into his chest. Whoever did it wanted to send a message, not of rage, but of ritual. And then came the detail that froze every investigator in the room. Under the bishop's fingernails were microscopic fibers from a clerical robe, fabric that matched only one set in the entire church, the set belonging to Deacon Samuel Price. The following Sunday, Samuel stood before the grieving congregation, preaching forgiveness, his voice trembling with emotion. But outside the chapel doors, unmarked cars waited quietly. The moment he stepped off the pulpit, handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The crowd gasped. Martha fainted. The truth, however, was still only half told, because when investigators opened Samuel's home office later that night, they found something hidden in a locked drawer, a small box containing Sarah Mitchell's necklace, the one she wore in every photo, and a handwritten note in the bishop's script, "For you, my mercy." The web was tightening, but it wasn't finished yet. There were still questions no one could answer. Why had Martha's blood been at the scene? Why had Samuel kept Sarah's necklace? And what exactly did that late-night phone call between the two of them mean? The truth was close, close enough to taste, but not yet ready to be seen. Because sometimes, in the search for justice, you find something worse than guilt. You find agreement. And the next revelation would prove that the bishop's death was not a single act of betrayal. It was a plan. A plan born out of lust, revenge, and salvation, twisted beyond recognition.
The arrest of Deacon Samuel Price should have closed the case. It didn't. Detectives soon realized that the evidence against him told only half the story. The blood, the fibers, the hidden necklace, they proved involvement, but not motive. What could drive a man of faith to destroy his best friend's life? When investigators pulled Samuel's financial records, a pattern emerged. Quiet cash withdrawals, thousands at a time, deposited into a separate account under Martha Cross's maiden name. Each deposit followed a late-night call between them. They had been in contact for months, long before the bishop's death. It began, detectives learned, as sympathy. Martha was unraveling after discovering the affair, and Samuel was the first to notice. He offered counsel, a listening ear, a verse for every wound. But sympathy became companionship, and companionship became something darker. Resentment shared in whispers. Martha confessed her humiliation. Samuel confessed his envy. The bishop had everything: respect, family, power, while Samuel stood in the shadow of his friend's pulpit. When their pain met in the same room, it took shape as something that looked like comfort but smelled like vengeance. They started meeting after prayer services. They spoke of forgiveness, but every conversation ended with the same unspoken question: what if he never faces justice? And then one night, Samuel gave the thought a name. What if justice isn't God's job anymore? When detectives confronted him with the bank records, he denied any conspiracy. But behind the glass of the interrogation room, his hands shook. He asked for Martha again and again. She, meanwhile, sat in another room, telling a version of events that mirrored his almost perfectly, except for one crucial detail. Martha said Samuel had planned it all. Samuel said Martha had begged him to help. Two stories, two lies, one truth hiding in the middle. The investigation widened. Officers found surveillance footage from a hardware store near the church. Martha buying cleaning supplies, Samuel purchasing rope and gloves on the same receipt. Their transactions were separated by only 10 minutes. Detective Harper stared at the footage for a long time. Two believers, preparing for something they'd call God's justice. Piece by piece, the story emerged. The night before the murders, Martha had confronted Daniel one last time. It was not reconciliation she wanted, it was confession. She told him she knew about Sarah's pregnancy. He denied it. The argument escalated, and Martha left in tears. But instead of going home, she drove to Samuel's house. Phone data placed her there for over an hour. Neighbors heard voices, hers raised in fury, his calm, deliberate. When she left, Samuel followed.
By midnight, both their phones went dark. At 2 a.m., Daniel Cross was dead. By dawn, Sarah Mitchell had vanished. Detectives realized the murders weren't spontaneous. They were the outcome of a plan meant to erase scandal forever. Daniel's death silenced disgrace. Sarah's disappearance erased the evidence of it. But plans built on lies collapse under their own weight. When police searched Samuel's study, they found drafts of a letter written as though from the bishop himself, an unsigned confession about an affair and a plea for forgiveness. The handwriting was careful, the ink fresh. If released, it would have shifted every suspicion away from Martha and Samuel, painting the tragedy as suicide and despair. But the letter was never sent. Instead, the two conspirators spent the following morning pretending to grieve, each watching the other for signs of weakness. And weakness came quickly. Martha began to unravel under the pressure of questioning. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, jumped at every sound. One evening, when detectives visited her home for another round of interviews, she whispered the words they had waited weeks to hear. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." That single sentence opened the floodgate. She told them about the meetings with Samuel, about the anger that bound them, about the plan that was supposed to be only a scare. She said Samuel promised no one would get hurt, that he would make it right without blood. She said she waited in her car when he went inside. When he returned, his clothes were stained, and he told her it was over. Samuel's version differed, of course. He insisted Martha had ordered it, that she was the one who couldn't bear the shame. "He did it for her," he muttered when pressed. "She said she'd lose everything." Neither account erased the truth. They had crossed a line together and watched it as it consumed them both. Weeks later, the jury would hear those two confessions side by side, mirror images of betrayal and fear. Samuel received life without parole. Martha accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. But in the eyes of St. Gloria's, there were no victors, only ruins. The church closed its doors, parishioners scattered, and the cross that once hung above the altar was removed, tarnished by scandal, kept now in an evidence locker marked Case 2147. As Detective Harper filed his final report, he wrote one line that stayed with him long after the case was buried. "They built their plan in the name of faith, but what they worshipped was vengeance." And for those who had believed in Bishop Cross, in Martha, in Samuel, that truth would echo louder than any sermon ever preached. Because at St. Gloria's, forgiveness had finally run out.
The trial of the People versus Martha Cross and Deacon Samuel Price began on a rain-soaked Monday morning that felt more like judgment than justice. For the first time in months, the church that once united an entire town had split into factions. Those who mourned Bishop Cross as a fallen saint, and those who whispered that maybe he deserved what came to him. The courtroom overflowed with faces familiar to both sides of the pulpit. Deacons, choir members, and elders, each staring at the accused through glassy eyes, not sure whether to pity or despise them. Martha entered first, pale, fragile, her once graceful composure now replaced by something hollow. She carried a Bible pressed against her chest like armor. Samuel followed, in shackles, eyes forward, lips sealed in a prayer that never left his throat. The prosecution painted a portrait of betrayal and manipulation, a grieving wife and a jealous subordinate bound by lust, vengeance, and pride. The defense argued the opposite, that both were victims of each other's control, two lost souls twisted by guilt. But nothing spoke louder than the silence that followed every name the prosecutor mentioned. Daniel Cross, Sarah Mitchell, names that once carried life, now carried weight. Day after day, the courtroom peeled back the layers of deceit. Forensic experts, phone analysts, church treasurers, each witness added another nail to the coffin of St. Gloria's perfect image. And then came the testimony
everyone had waited for. Martha Cross took the stand. The room fell still. Even the hum of the overhead fans seemed to pause as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Her voice trembled as she began, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She spoke of her husband's betrayal, of nights spent praying for forgiveness that never came. She spoke of Samuel's kindness, of the comfort he offered when her world began to fall apart. She admitted to the affair of the heart that turned into conspiracy, but insisted she never wanted Daniel dead. When the prosecutor asked, "Then why did you help him cover it up?" she hesitated. Her eyes darted toward Samuel, who stared back coldly, jaw locked tight. "Because," she whispered, "I was afraid of what he would do if I didn't." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Samuel leaned forward, shaking his head slowly, disbelief written across his face. "Liar!" he mouthed. The judge called for order, but the silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Martha's words shifted the entire tone of the trial. Overnight, the narrative transformed from co-conspirator to coerced accomplice. Sympathy began to turn. The media headlines softened. Bishop's widow forced into silence. The story was changing, and Samuel Price was losing control of it. On the fourth week of the trial, the prosecution introduced a new piece of evidence: a sealed envelope found in Martha's home during the second search. Inside were handwritten pages addressed to someone named Lena. The letter was dated 2 days before the murders. No one in the courtroom knew who Lena was. But as the pages were read aloud, it became clear Lena was Martha's sister, and the words inside were haunting. "If anything happens, know that it was Samuel's idea. He says it's the only way to save us both. I don't believe him anymore, but I can't stop it. Pray for me. Pray for Daniel."
The jury froze. Even the judge's gavel seemed unnecessary. Every face told the same story. That letter shattered whatever remained of Samuel's defense. But just when the town began to view Martha as the victim, the final twist came to light. During the sentencing phase, a young court clerk discovered a sealed USB drive hidden inside Martha's Bible, a Bible she had carried since her arrest. On it was a single video file, time-stamped the night of Daniel Cross's death. The footage showed Martha sitting in her car, parked outside the bishop's home. The rain blurred her windshield, but her face was visible, lit only by the glow of her phone. She was recording herself. "He deserves this," she said softly into the camera. "God forgive me, but he deserves this. And Samuel, he'll do it because he loves me. When it's done, we'll both be free." Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the clip played. The truth was undeniable now. Martha hadn't been forced. She had orchestrated everything, played on Samuel's loyalty, his envy, his faith. Her letter to Lena was insurance, a backup plan to paint herself the victim if things went wrong. The final twist was simple yet devastating. Samuel had killed out of devotion. Martha had manipulated out of vengeance. When the judge read the verdict, both were found guilty, but of different sins. Samuel of murder in first degree, Martha of conspiracy and perverting justice. As bailiffs led them away, Martha turned once toward the gallery. Her eyes found the empty seat that once belonged to her husband, and for the first time, her expression broke, not in sorrow, but in satisfaction.
Outside the courthouse, St. Gloria's congregation gathered in quiet prayer. Some wept, some raged, others simply walked away, unwilling to face the ruins of their faith. In the end, the church that once preached salvation had become a monument to deceit. Detective Harper, standing in the rain, said only one thing as he closed his notepad for the final time. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it kneels in prayer. The screen fades to black. The faint echo of a church bell rings 12 times. Then, silence.
She died 6 months later in her cell. No visitors, no funeral. As for the town of St. Gloria, they tried to rebuild. A new church was erected on the outskirts, a modest building, nothing like the grand cathedral that had fallen, but the sermons were quieter now, humbler. The people no longer worshipped names, they worshipped truth. Detective Harper, old and gray, attended one last service before leaving town for good. He sat in the back pew as the new pastor spoke. The past is not buried where we leave it. It waits, beneath the things we choose to forget. And in that moment, Harper knew some stories don't end. They just go silent. In the end, sin doesn't stay buried. It surfaces, in whispers, in guilt, in graves. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. If this story gripped you, if it made you question just how far love, power, and betrayal can go, then don't leave yet. Subscribe to Crime Vault, where every story is real, every twist is darker than fiction, and every secret eventually comes to light. This is Crime Vault, and the truth always returns.